brother just told me. Jay, why are we laughing so much? How many years, John?
I started teaching Hamlet when Lyndon Johnson was president.
And she says, I met the youthful Lord Paris at Lawrence's cell and gave him what becoming love I might, not overstepping the bounds of modesty.
No, I already did that with the other
I should
guy.
say not.
Him and Beowulf and...
But you know, when he dies, he's like desperate to be remembered. Tell my story. Remember me. Should we be doing this? Should we stop right now?
No.
Ha! And we're back. It's Paul and Jay with Teacher Talk, talking about the Odyssey. Again, we're on book 22 and plowing ahead with just 2 short books left after tonight.
Yep.
Jay, it's good to see you again tonight. And I'm looking forward to jumping into this spare, bloody, terse, get down to business chapter, book 22, Death in the Great Hall. What are your feelings?
Same. I love teaching this poem for all the reasons you and I have always discussed. There's a lot of weird sort of satisfaction to a new young reader finally getting to this chapter.
Yeah.
I know we're going to start with a poem, but I don't, early on I give them a lot of scaffolding, but this chapter I just have them, they know what's going to happen. The Emily Wilson translation, the title is Bloodshed. It's like The Butler Did It.
Yeah.
I think the Fagles is Slaughter in the Hall, or is that the Fitzgerald one?
Fitzgerald is Death in the Great Hall, so Fagles must be Slaughter in the Hall.
All of them are, but I mean, it doesn't matter because you know this is about to happen. But I tell them, there's been chapters where we know what's going to happen. Odysseus is going to go to the underworld, and he's given a job to do that's very specific. But I'll often ask students, what do you think is definitely going to happen, and then what might be surprising? So I think by this stage, it's less about super scaffolding, and it's more about getting them to think. So in this chapter, I asked them, what do you think is going to stand out about the fighting itself?
Yeah.
Will there be anything interesting before the fighting, and will there be anything interesting after the fighting?
Yes.
And we have like a 10-minute chat. We list some predictions on the board. It doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. It just gets them thinking of the arc of the story.
And they're they're far enough along into Homer by now that they know, I don't know, everything's kind of interesting or everything's kind of different than you think. So even a chapter with the title as blatant, as blunt as this one, I think it's worthwhile to ask questions like that. How's this going to go? What's going to make this significant? Is there going to be something with Telemachus? Is he going to step up? Is he going to make it? Is he going to fall flat? What's going to happen here? Yeah.
I think too, not to get too far ahead, I think too, it really is one way of clearly seeing who's reading closely, because when you're halfway or 3/4 of the way through a book, to ask questions like that shows whether a kid's paying attention not only to the behavioral patterns of the characters, but to the behavioral patterns of the storytelling itself.
Yes.
And they don't have to be 100% right. I mean, God, I remember reading these things for the first time as a kid, and I was just keeping my head above water. That's how
you could barely stick with it. Yeah, you can barely stick with it. And I always try and emphasize, I've always done this, but now more than ever with, the release of AI and students' temptations to not only write their papers using it, but to get a lot of their analysis from it. I really try to tell them that the papers they write really need to reflect our reading of the Odyssey. There are lots of readings of the Odyssey. Our reading will be the one that ended up coursing in the way that our class discussion coursed. So when you make predictions, that helps set the table. And then I try to keep notes and hold them accountable, a little bit and say, I want you to write in terms of, in the key, with the notes, that we, sang this song ourselves and write in that way. So that's another good reason to ask questions and a good way to implement it and make the papers that they write or the final discussions that they do, make them an authentic representation of our reading in this place and time.
Yeah. And I think too, I think this is important to say. And by the way, if you like the podcast, please subscribe and comment. We like engaging with people. We've had some great connections with some teachers and some readers. But what I was going to say is, like, when I went to college and grad school and I studied literary theory, you have this sense that they're all discrete. So you have formalist, Aristotelian, you have psychoanalytic readings, Marxist, whatever. And I remember reader response. There was a group of teachers in the writing center at my college, and they were kind of crapped on for being reader response people. And I think you and I have talked about this. I think one way you could tell you're in the hands of a really good book is that reader response works, because whatever a reader wants to notice and think about is worth it. And I think you and I have discussed this too, that teaching this book, if you have 2 sections of kids reading, and you've had this happen too, I know, you're reading the same chunk of text and 2 classes go in 2 different directions and they're both good. I think a key to maturing as a teacher is moving from being a sort of like a lockstep, I have an organized set of things that I want to communicate, to balancing, yes, there's some stuff I want them to know, but like honor what they're noticing, like be okay with both some clarity and some unpredictability, I would say.
Oh, yes. Right. Yeah, which shows your experience as a teacher, having heard the story over and over. You have to know. If you don't know that the story is broader than an even solid SparkNotes take on the chapter, then you yourself haven't been paying attention. So there just simply is more. And so even if you're like me, I don't like an anything goes kind of approach. It's not like we're all right and anything anyone says is just as good as it. That's not true. At the same time, there is an enormous amount to talk about. And so separate classes can go in radically different directions and have radically different readings and it not be conflicting. They're just alternates. They're just other things that you're talking about amongst the possible things. So I think openness to that, you're right, openness to that is a great thing. And it also, as you also indicated, is a sign that you're into a good book. So, well, hey, let's dive in. Homer was pretty straight to the point in this chapter, so we should honor his style, I think. But first, surely you have a poem for us for tonight.
Yeah, I was poking around and I want to spend a summer just reading Wilfred Owen. I've read the biggies, the Dulce et Decorum Est and Strange Meeting. And this is a poem by Wilfred Owen, who you probably all know was a British soldier who died right before World War I ended, like days before. And he was lined up to be maybe the greatest poet of the 20th century. He died in his 20s. This is a poem by Wilfred Owen called Insensibility. And it just struck me reading these later chapters of the Odyssey that someone who's been through what Odysseus has been through and what he's trying to do now has to have a balance of decisive violence and a sort of emotional coldness. I mean, he has to see the wife he's been longing to embrace for 20 years and pretend he doesn't know her. I couldn't do that. You couldn't do that. Let's be honest. So it's this, he has to be decisively physical and then also weirdly decisively distant and almost like completely unemotional. So it's a poem kind of about that. And for those who haven't read Wilfred Owen, just you can actually poke around YouTube and get some really nice, out loud readings. But this is Insensibility. It's a little long. I apologize. But Paul, I think you'd really like this. It's astonishing.
All right.
So Insensibility. Happy are men who yet before they are killed can let their veins run cold, whom no compassion fleers or makes their feet sore on the alleys cobbled with their brothers. The front line withers. But they are troops who fade, not flowers, for poets tearful fooling, men gaps for filling, losses who might have fought longer, but no one bothers. And some cease feeling, even themselves or for themselves. This is the magic couplet. Dullness best solves the tease and doubt of shelling, and chance's strange arithmetic comes simpler than the reckoning of their shilling. They keep no check on armies' decimation. Happy are those who lose imagination. They have enough to carry with ammunition. Their spirits drag no pack. Their old wounds, save with cold, cannot more ache. Having seen all things red, their eyes are rid of the hurt of the color of blood forever. And terror's first constriction over, their hearts remain small drawn. Their senses, in some scorching cautery of battle, now long since ironed, can laugh among the dying, unconcerned. Happy the soldier home, with not a notion how somewhere every dawn some men attack, and many sighs are drained. Happy the lad whose mind was never trained. His days are worth forgetting more than not. He sings along the march which we march taciturn, because of dusk, the long, forlorn, relentless tread from larger day to huger night. We wise, who with a thought besmirch blood over all our soul, how should we see our task but through his blunt and lashless eyes? Alive, he's not vital overmuch. Dying, not mortal overmuch, nor sad, nor proud, nor curious at all. He cannot tell old men's placidity from his, but cursed are the dullards whom no cannon stuns, that they should be as stones. Wretched are they, and mean, with paucity that never was simplicity. By choice they made themselves immune to pity, and whatever moans in man before the last sea and the hapless stars, whatever mourns when many leave these shores, whatever shares the eternal reciprocity of tears.
The dehumanizing
Oh,
of a person. Cursed are the dullards, lost the hurt of the color of blood. Wow.
so check, Paul, I knew you'd like it. That's why I picked it.
And it's moving.
Check that poem out and just sit with it for a while. It's every 2 lines you could spend a half hour. I mean, it's so good.
Odysseus has himself waded through blood. And in this chapter, also 22, he's going to wade through a lot more blood. At the end, it says he was caked in blood up to his armpits. And this is the culmination that we've been waiting for a long time, since Odysseus returned back to one more strange island, to Ithaca itself. So he gets to it in this chapter. He's been a beggar. He's been abused by the suitors, so he's seen firsthand how they've treated people, how they've run his house and run over his house. So all of that works together to help the reader be eager for that thing that Odysseus is eager for, which is the setting things right, of a kind of justice in this hall. You feel a little bit what Telemachus has been feeling since the very beginning, since book 1, and you want restitution. And I think for our very contemporary ears, this is an extremely violent restitution. Some lives are saved.
Yep.
And
that's wicked interesting to talk about with kids.
It's super interesting.
Yeah.
So it's all a bloodbath, and it all seems justified. All of this hand-wringing and sweating that Odysseus has done, staying up late at night, trying to figure out, can I take on all of these suitors, over 100 suitors? What did we come up with? 115?
108, I think.
108, yeah, somewhere in there, of suitors that he has to take on. He has a team. He's got two of his servants, the cattle herd and the goat herd, or swineherd, who said they would help him. And then Telemachus is there too, so they have some plotting. But it is 4 against 108.
It's not the 18.
Yeah.
Mr. T is not coming.
No, and they don't have that time, that montage time, alone in the garage with the welder. Yeah, where they can build the thing.
I knew you would lean in that reference. I knew it.
Right.
You
want to hear that music start in the background. Yeah. See Mr. T with the welding glasses on. They don't quite get that, though.
Kitty the fool who eats Odysseus' food.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, but as Hannibal would say, he loves it when a plan comes together. And the plan comes together in this chapter.
Oh, man, you're good.
All right.
You're good. We need to have a podcast about a work of literature where we try to weave in as many 80s allusions as possible. Like, that could be a separate pod.
Well, let's do it. Let's use our sort of outline to walk through this if we can. I think it might work for us.
Yeah.
Let's find the obvious and essential in this chapter. Let's find the subtle but crucial. And then any lingering questions or lingering awesomeness, as I've come to call it as well, that we like to just kind of sit with in this chapter. So, Jay, you want to start us off? What do you got? What's obvious and essential? If you're teaching this book, obviously, essentially, you're going to land on, what are you going to land on?
Violence, particularly violence against men. So
Right.
I think I really like to ask all of my students, when you notice an obvious thing, don't hesitate talking about the obvious thing. But if it's like, I don't know, moodiness in Hamlet, I always will say, all right, what's Hamlet-esque about his moodiness? What makes his moodiness different from other characters in the world? Or if you're talking about like Beowulf's heroism, like, all right, fine, but like you've met lots of heroic characters. What's Beowulfian? Like, make it specific to the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
Don't paint with broad strokes. So it isn't simply violence. What's Homeric violence? I think it's completely not euphemistic, number one. And I also think it has it's very vivid and realistic. And I just think you were alluding to this before. It's sort of lack of euphemism. And I think our hesitance to teach certain things is really interesting now because kids have access to more violence, sex, and everything than anybody's ever had. But we're almost more hesitant than any group of people to willfully expose them to works of literature with those things in them. And there's reasons you don't want to expose a 5-year-old. Is 7 okay? 9, 11? Like, where's the line? But I think of Dickens made most of his money giving public readings because the copyright laws were so bad. So he gave public performances. The number one most popular chunk of a novel that he would perform, which is in no way the best, was Nancy's death by the hands of Sykes at the end of Oliver Twist. And in the novel, it's pornographically violent. It is if any parent read it, they'd complain.
Right.
And Dickens said, like, I'm understating it. Like, if you want to know what poverty is actually like, violence, domestic, if you want to know what it's actually like, go look.
Yeah.
This is understating it. So anyway, I think Homer has a version of that. So I actually wanted to share a little moment from the Iliad because I think this chapter, and this is not much, but this chapter is the one moment in the Odyssey that most closely rubs up against the ethos of the Iliad.
Hey, I totally agree.
The Iliad is a poem about violent, lethal force.
Right.
And we haven't seen that a lot in the Odyssey. The Odyssey is about trickery, wisdom, choices, a commitment to returning home, however you want to define it. But lethal force hasn't been the pulse of the Odyssey. So just to give people, and I can't recommend more strongly the Wilson translation of the Iliad, or any major translation of the Iliad. It's, if you love reading or teaching the Odyssey, do yourself a favor and go back to the Iliad too. In your copious free time as a teacher, which we know you have.
Right. I can just buzz through it in the evening. Yeah.
Yeah. Settle with a little cup of tea and kill some Trojans. That's what I say. But here's what we talk about. Achilles and Hector finally fight in book 22. And Achilles says to Hector, dog, the ultimate insult, because women are only called dog, do not beg or speak of knees or parents. Hector's begging for his life. If only I had will and heart to do it, I would carve up your flesh and eat it raw. Again, Polyphemus is seen as particularly villainous because he eats raw meat.
Right.
The abominations you have done me, nobody can save your body from the dogs, etc., etc. Hector responds basically like he doesn't fight back. Achilles says the action is Achilles pulled the bronze spear from the corpse, set it aside, stripped the bloody armor from his body. He ends up stabbing Hector's body posthumously, and then as we know, ties Hector's body to the back of his chariot and drags it all around Troy so that his father Priam could see his son's body. So when we talk about this, the lack of euphemism and physical violence, people that read the Iliad first will read book 22 and say, here it is. So I just want to read a few snippets, none of them are long, of male violence. And Paul, you and I were talking before we went live about how no time goes by. I mean, so in line 7 of the Wilson, Odysseus aimed his deadly arrow at Antinous. Young man sat, and oh my God, my students hate Antinous. Right?
Yeah. What a
Young man.
win. What a win to make him feel hatred for him. That's a win, Jay.
Yeah. Just about to lift his golden goblet, swirling wine around, ready to drink. Again, echoing the fact that Antinous is using Odysseus' stuff. It's not just that he's a dude sitting there. He had no thought of death, which is stupid. How could he? Who would think a single man among so many banqueters would dare to risk dark death, however strong he was? Odysseus aimed at his throat and then shot. The point pierced all the way through his soft neck. That's a key detail. This isn't a guy who's done much fighting, right? He flopped down to the side and his cup slipped out of his hands, and then his thick streams of blood gushed from his nostrils, his foot twitched, etc. So Antinous dies right away, completely without euphemism. I'm just skimming around.
Yeah.
On 79, Eurymachus is killed. He drew his sharp bronze sword with a dreadful scream. He leapt at him. Same instant, Odysseus let fly and hit his chest beside the nipple, and instantly the arrow pierced his liver. We get lots of anatomy in the Iliad. We learn lots of the body parts. And here we go. The sword fell from his hand. He doubled up and fell across the table, spilling food and wine across the floor. It would suck being a waiter in Ithaca. He smashed his head against the ground and in desperate pain kicked up the chair, and darkness drenched his eyes.
Ugh.
And then I want to skip pretty far ahead because we get Athena, who is in disguise as Mentor a lot, but she uses her Aegis. And I actually spend a lot of time on this.
Oh, really? Okay.
The Aegis, I've learned, is interesting, and you can read different things. Basically, it's a shield made from the skin of the I think it's a wolf that suckled the infant Zeus in Crete in a cave.
Okay.
And Zeus used it in his battle against the Titans. His son Hephaestus made it, the shield. So this goat skin is on the outer cover of the shield. And then the Gorgon, Medusa, is killed. And they put her face on the shield when Athena gets it. When he gives it to his daughter Athena, it becomes more powerful. What's interesting is we get this thing based on maternal nurturing, but it's also based on the fact that Medusa becomes Medusa. She's a beautiful woman. She's raped by Poseidon in the temple of Athena, and Athena's response to her rape is to punish her by making her monstrous. Athena always sides with men. It's really, really interesting. Athena is not a woke goddess, folks.
She is not.
She is making Ithaca great again. Oh my God, I'm getting political. Okay.
She did not read the memo correctly on the Me Too movement. She did not get that right.
The Aegis is history isn't we have that word under someone's aegis, meaning under someone's protection.
Yeah.
But its history has to do with both nurturing, completely ridiculous punishment, murder, safety. It's this weird mixture. Wow. And it's sort of the feeling of the end of the Odyssey, that the Aegis is history, represents that feeling of protection, safety, but also indiscriminate violence, indiscriminate punishment. I'm just learning this now, and I've just been thinking about it, but it seems like a really interesting symbolism of the complexity of violence in Homer.
That's a great tip. I haven't gone past just the initial entry, like in Edith Hamilton or something on the Aegis, something very rudimentary, but that's a good tip. There may be something there to really, really dig into. And it's something to see too in the Odyssey, like you say, just that point of Athena always siding with men.
Yeah.
And with men's violence.
Yeah.
To the nth degree, in this case with the Gorgon.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Just a couple of more nuggets. We have Laodes, the priest, who begs to be saved, and Odysseus slashes down, sliced right through the priest's neck, and his head still framing words rolled in the dust. And I want to say, and I may have mentioned this in another pod, but I tell my students this because I think it's wicked interesting. There's a Homeric term, dupine, which means the sound a corpse makes when it lands on the ground.
Yeah.
And I just think the fact they have a word for that is suggestive that that's a sound that they can identify, which is interesting.
Yeah, Leodes made it. He made that sound, didn't he?
Yeah, and then we get Melanthius's death, which I don't know if I want to read out loud, but
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no,
I like
this is
reading
family
it,
friendly at some level, Jay.
reading it to teenage boys. They have a lot of feelings. And anyway, I just think the complete lack of euphemism, it's no coincidence why people who've been in combat read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and once they strip through the trappings of the fact that it's obviously much older, it's the lack of euphemism. And anyway, I find that the nature of Homeric violence is diverse. It's anatomical. It has a moral quality. It has both a sense of justice sometimes and then a weird arbitrariness sometimes.
I like that point. And I like also that somehow it works for us too. We couldn't be further from it, I think.
Yeah.
Culturally, our daily lives are completely divorced from even the killing of, animals for food or, or the harvesting of lettuce, even for salads. We didn't even chop off lettuce heads, much less, chicken heads.
Red lettuce.
Killing people, this just isn't in most of our lives at all. And yet somehow this, this does still work. It making it feel real and, I don't know, intense. Well, as you said, it's just unadorned, which I was kind of struck with as I reread this. It's not symbolic.
No.
Like it's somehow the story is fundamental. It's a core story and a core story model. But as you dig into all the parts of the story, there's not a ton of symbolism. This chapter is it reminds you of that it's unbelievably literal and real and gory, actually. So kind of surprising, kind of ironic for a book that's taken as a archetypal story, essentially, which you expect to be like more abstract or something. Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. And in all my times of teaching it, it has felt safe in that sense. Like it's both real and gritty. And at the same time, it's not like reading, a popular novel that was just published in which we're talking about deaths that some of us may have rubbed up against,
Right.
like urban violence or some kind of, shooting in school or some awful thing like that.
Exactly.
And honestly, it's a little too soon, to go down that path and allow yourself to like emotionally give yourself over to it because it's just too, it's too raw in some ways. This has both that intensity and the distance at the same time. So it's ideal, I think, in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. I like that. Those are all really good examples. And it kind of draws the students in. I think sometimes they don't like to be condescended to. And this book does not leave you feeling that way, at all.
No.
I've got obvious and essential.
What's your obvious one?
Yeah. I've got it as a kind of a plain point, but I think you can dig into it. And in a statement, it's Odysseus and Telemachus had to clear the Great Hall themselves. Those two men had to do it. They had to do it side by side. They had to succeed at it to bring justice and to dole out mercy, which is a part of bringing justice. But this had to be done. There was no other way around it. Telemachus had to be a part of it. He had to stand with his father. They could organize for help, but it had to be run by Odysseus and Telemachus together. And I think it's interesting that Athena shows up, as you pointed out. Mentor wanders in the door. Hey guys, what's cooking today? And just happens to walk in on a slaughter. And it's interesting though, he talks, or Athena eggs Odysseus on. Come on, what a falling off. I remember you back at Troy. You used to hit a little harder. You used to be a little more aggressive.
Yep.
What's been going on? You're looking a little pudgy over there. So there's that. But she, and as the suitors notice, because to the suitors, it's Mentor, it's not Athena, but Odysseus guesses that it's Athena. They say, that guy's full of hot air. He doesn't do anything. So Mentor / Athena does not jump in to help make it right. This is no salvation, from above. There's nothing like a Deus Ex Machina that pops in here to make sure everything works out. Right when you think Odysseus would need it most, fighting against 106 adversaries. It doesn't happen. Odysseus credits the gods at the end of the story. He says it was the gods who did it, and fate, who came and made this thing happen. We're not going to gloat over this death or cheer or anything. But in truth, when you watch it happen and you see it, death for death, bloody shot and hacking and killing for killing, it's been done by Telemachus. It's been done by Odysseus. When someone needs mercy, it's because Telemachus vouches for that person. Says, "Oh yes, don't kill him. He was with us." And so it's Odysseus and Telemachus. And there's an interesting line when Athena/Mentor shows up, and it says they would have jumped in, but they had to wait and hold back so that Telemachus and Odysseus could work it out together. So it seems important to me to say that, like, this has to be done for the culmination of the story. It's kind of the culmination of the Telemachy, the first 4 books of the Odyssey. Not only that Telemachus, so far we know that Telemachus can go out into the world and come back and be decisive. That's awesome. But it's backed up by the gold behind the cash is that he can come through and fight with his father. He has to fight. He has to participate in that male violence, as you said, and kill and be able to do it. So he has to do it. And then Odysseus obviously has to do it, has to take down these people who've been impious, who've been aggressive, who's been ambitious about his household and about his wife. So it has to be done. So I'm going to put that down as my obvious and essential. Odysseus and Telemachus had to do this. They had to fight side by side. There's no way out. No one else could do it. This is the resolution to the main antagonism in this. So that's what I've got. It goes along, I think, with your point about the violence. It picks that point up.
Yeah.
And so the violence is essential to it. It's unavoidable. And so men have to be shot and killed and hacked and decapitated and all that. That's just a part of the story.
And I think too, I think conversations come up in our classes. Like, is there a difference between gratuitous violence and violence connected to justice? And I think this is one of those moments, and I'm finding myself saying this a lot. We enter a book with our own ethics, but those really shouldn't matter. Every book presents its own version of how people work, relationships work, metaphysics, ethics, whatever.
Yeah.
And to impose my 21st century Massachusetts, my experience, it's stupid. I mean, it's crappy reading. So it feels to me that the suitors, I'm not sure about the priests, maybe, because of what Odysseus says. You've obviously prayed for the success of the suitors, so I get to kill you.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like, disobey. It's not just that they ate his baklava for 20 years, 10 years. It's because they didn't obey the laws of hospitality, and they didn't obey what was best for their king and their, all that, or some of them was their king.
Yeah.
And it's really about what the gods want, And it seems like this is a universe where if you habitually disobey that, you die. And that's not weird, and it's expected.
Yeah. Odysseus says, there's a nice line in the Fitzgerald translation that says that, obeying the gods or dealing justly and being pious profits more in the end. All that you gained in my absence by taking stuff you thought was just lying around for the taking. Yes, you profited for that. You ate really well for 20 years, and probably took home some nice, spoons and cups and silverware.
We have some lovely parting gifts for you.
You have some lovely party gifts, but now you're dead. Now you're dead. Gruesomely.
You can't use it.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the ethic, that the long arc of justice. You will live to see it reach its its culmination. You will, and that's in this book. Yeah, significantly. Well, is there something subtle in this then? I mean, we've talked about how plain and open and symbolic the story is, but what do you find that's subtle but crucial as you're teaching this book? You really shouldn't miss though, and you might.
Yeah, so I'm going with my violence theme because I feel like I'm on a roll.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I'm going to go violence towards women.
Yeah.
Odysseus says very early in book 22 to the suitors, "You fleeced my house and raped my slave girls."
Yeah.
That's key language. And near the end of 22, they're not just hanged. I just read this. They're hanged with a ship's cable. And what's interesting is like sea vessels have been the agents of Odysseus's freedom and his capacity to regain his kingship. So probably to him, maybe on some subliminal level or not, it's also a means to getting rid of everything that's broken and wrong, even with women who do this.
Yeah.
Even the nature of killing them is connected to the way he became free and the way he so that's interesting.
That's interesting.
But anyway, Wilson has been talked a lot about the difference in her translation because she calls them slaves. And in the other translations, they're bitches and sluts. And
Yeah.
she's very clear that those words were completely added and there's no abuse in the Greek whatsoever. The word is slave. And that now the question is, what do you want the reader to think by adding those things? It's interesting because Odysseus says, you raped my slaves. That's like you saying you stole my lawnmower. I mean, slaves are things, right? So Telemachus says, I refuse to grant these girls a clean death since they poured down shame on me and mother when they lay beside the suitors. I mean, it makes it sound like they went to a bed and breakfast. I don't think that's what happened. So here's the description, and I love it, but for like creepy reasons. At that, Telemachus wound a piece of sailor's rope round the rotunda and round the mighty pillar, stretched up so high no foot could touch the ground. As doves or thrushes spread their wings to fly home to their nests, but someone sets a trap. They crash into a net, a bitter bedtime. Just so the girls, their heads all in a row, were strung up, with the noose around their necks, to make their death an agony. They gasped, feet twitching for a while, but not for long.
Yeah,
Well, I think
that line has always stood out to me.
I think in the discussion of the moral spectrum of murder, I don't know anybody who thinks Antinous should have got a free pass. I don't know anybody that thinks now Melanthius's death involves a lot of disgusting mutilation, and I always apologize to students if we have to read that right before a lunch period, particularly if there's meatball subs. But anyway, sorry everyone, you had 3,000 years to read it.
And so, sometimes there are meatballs,
man. But anyway, it's really interesting. Do these girls, because it's sort of guilty by association, do they have to go? And then what does that mean if you have to kill innocent people? Because they don't have agency. Like their essence is property. So these upper level nobility who are coming every night can remote control them around. So they're like Odysseus uses the word rape. So I find this to be the more troubling side. I don't have any problem with any of the male violence.
Yeah, okay.
The women violence almost suggests that, to me, particularly not just the killing, but the desire to make the killing of the women something more awful and more long lasting than the quick killing of the men.
Yeah.
Suggests a particular kind of brokenness in Odysseus. Like,
well, it could be, but note in the story though, and actually in the Fitzgerald translation, it's even more gruesome than the Emily Wilson, because Emily Wilson makes it sound like he hanged them all at once. In Fitzgerald, he says Telemachus threw a single hawser, a ship's rope, over the beam, and one by one, he pulled them up into the air and killed them. So like they're just standing in a line, waiting their turn, 12 different girls. So it is extremely gruesome. Also, though, Odysseus told him to kill them with the sword. He told him to just cut their heads off or whatever. And Telemachus chooses to take the much more slow, gruesome. Yeah, he said, no. I'm not doing that. That's too good for you guys. I would not give the clean death of a beast to trolls, prostitutes, who make a mockery of my mother and of me too, you sluts who lay with suitors.
Right. So I think the ethical question here is Fitzgerald, Fagles, Pope, Wilson, whoever would all acknowledge they're slaves.
Yeah.
So what does it do to call them prostitute? Can a slave also be a slut is a question.
Yeah, Eurymachus calls them slaves. Odysseus calls them slaves. Then Telemachus, right before he kills them. I think it's back to the thing we talked about. I think it was last episode. It is interesting that slaves are treated as having moral agency. You don't have to agree with it, but within the context of the book, they are treated that way. There are only 12 of the 50. Eurymachus says 50 all told are your female slaves. This is Fitzgerald, trained by your lady and myself in service, guarding the rest of it and taught to be submissive. 12 went bad, flouting me, flouting Penelope too. And so those are the 12, that get killed. So it's not all of them. And they had snuck out and laughed and played. And we saw one of them one night, the night before with Odysseus, making fun of him, calling him names, trying to run him off. And she behaved disreputably. So the story definitely gives them the moral agency. And that's what, we were talking about last episode of trying to figure out, how that works. It's an interesting combination. Both call them slaves and to say you could be good slave or bad slave. You could do what you're supposed to do or not what you're supposed to do. So, and I thought something you said too, I wanted to point out is that, there's kind of guilt on both sides. The suitors are killed for raping, and then these 12 girls are killed for whoring, or sleeping with, so I don't know whose fault it was, but each is treated as if it was their fault.
But there is a long precedent for raped women in mythology to be seen as villainous. Medusa being the primary one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's an archetype within Greek mythology, is raped women being morally flawed, even though they were literally overpowered and raped, sometimes by God.
Right.
So
and in this case, Telemachus.
I think it's okay to say we can think this is a really good poem, but not super enlightened in certain respects. This is Bronze Age poetry. Like, they're not going to have super postmodern views of gender. I mean, there's moments where women are like peculiarly strong and powerful, and that's interesting. And there's moments where poor people and slaves are peculiarly strong and powerful. But I bet it's not weird for people all over the world at this time to see raped women as broken and immoral, which we would never do.
Right. And to side against them by default. But Telemachus definitely does. He seems to have been really upset. This line of that we lived for this long time, watching you make a mockery of my mother and make a mockery of me. He wants to blame them not just for sleeping with the suitors, but for siding with them, for making it more enjoyable, more attractive, more comfortable, more seductive for them to come back and do what they were doing. They joined in on it. And in his view, they didn't have to do that. And that stands out to me as the thing that they're being killed for. It's the exact same thing that the suitors are being killed for, which is taking advantage of the household and living a life of pleasure on someone else's dime. That just was not yours. It was not yours to take. And whatever is yours to take, there's an uneven doling out of who has what to take. But whatever it is the gods have given you, and we all have mercy and grace on everyone for whatever they have been given. We see that embodied in or exemplified in Odysseus's action and speech as a beggar himself, in the guise of a beggar himself. Whatever that is, we have mercy on you, and we say, hey, we'll do all we can to help you. But if you cross the lines, if you try to take what isn't yours, then you're a violator, and you violate, as you said earlier, you violated the gods. It's not just not just Odysseus's household, but you've run afoul of the nature of things, and you're gonna pay for that. Yeah, it is something. I mean, you can land there. There's a ton to talk about, which is another selling point, for the book and the chapter, and it's fun to hear how that strikes students. And before they know better, before they can stop themselves and be restrained and jaded high school students, all of a sudden they'll be talking about it and fighting about it. And then you've got them, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this a lot, that I think the landscape now, and this is a good thing, is that kids are encouraged not to be judgmental of other people. I think one of the best parts about literature, and Pride and Prejudice does this better than any book, but I think every great book does this, is that everybody at the end of the day is pretty mysterious. That even the people we know the best in the world, we don't completely know people. And I
Yeah.
think that's really great. That's like one of the best parts about being a human being is the inherent mystery of other people.
Oh yeah.
But that
Yeah.
being said,
Yeah.
I think it's good to tell kids, please be judgmental as readers. Like, you
Yeah.
can fight about characters and whether they did good or bad things based on the criteria set up in the book. Like, does the book suggest that this behavior is good or bad? Fight, go. Like, I think
Yes.
that's fine. Like, we don't
Absolutely.
want them to be lukewarm readers. You know what I mean?
I
So,
totally agree. Completely agree. Or writers. I don't let them write the both and.
yeah,
I
yeah.
I often give agree or disagree with this resolution. Take the affirmative or take the negative. And then in my instructions in the paper guide sheet, but do not take both. I know that you can see both sides. That's what makes it a really good resolution. There are great arguments on both sides, but I don't want you to take both sides. You take exactly one and drive down the path with your proofs and supports and arguments as if, this is the only possible answer. So that's judgmentalism.
Yep.
That's developing a perspective and pushing it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's good. That's good.
What do you have for a lingering question?
Well, I have a subtle but crucial that I think is subtle but is related deeply to the to the book, and you can find this thread and hang on to it throughout the entire book. I think. Note that Odysseus is not fighting. He is not fighting the suitors. All right, as literal and as bloody as this is, and I agree with all that. Odysseus is fighting fate. He is fighting against everything that time and chance and competing wills and foolishness and wisdom and avarice and ambition and desires of all kinds, all the elements of circumstance have brought to bear on his life. This is the essential Odyssean story, is that he is fighting in the grind and dust and dirt of real life. And the whole composition of that is fate. And it struck me in reading this time, how unlike a sort of Hollywood movie this is. Because who is the first person that is killed in this chapter? And as you pointed out, Jay, it happens on like page 1.
Yeah, the one we can't wait to die.
Yes, the one we can't wait to die. The one all the suitors say is he was the best of us. He was the champion fighter. He's the one. And in most films or movies, that is the last person who dies. Right? All the little throwaway, the filler guys get killed off one by one, and then it's the showdown. The hero and the final other big bad guy who's just about as strong as the hero, but not quite. And he dies, in the end. Notice significantly, that is almost the opposite of what happens here. Antinous is shot first while he's drinking. He doesn't even get to lift a sword and fight. Supposedly he was a great fighter. We never even got to see him in action. It's almost disappointing. But Odysseus just takes him out in a second. It's over. Hero's gone. So what this points to is that there is no hero, and there's no one who's approximately like Odysseus. That's not the story we're telling here. The story is that there are a whole bunch of guys who've been hanging out here. The whole suitor story, the whole thing of people just trying to take over his life. That is what he is fighting against. It is not one ringleader champion, sort of person who he has to take down and win against. It's not it. He has to fight against all the elements. And it's not done. Actually, his problems have only just begun. Notice he's just killed the noblemen and the sons of noblemen of the island. These are the last people you get away with killing. If you kill some poor beggar in the street, who's going to sue you for that? But you can't kill the senator's sons. You can't kill the Silicon Valley, wealthy sons and kids and get away with it. Someone's going to have something to say about it.
But this is the second generation of men in a row that he's killed.
Yeah, but the first one was an accident, Jay. This one,
well,
he didn't mean to.
He lost him.
Yeah, the second generation, he did. Yeah, he has done on purpose. But I think it's important to say this and to think about that. This is what he's fighting. He's fighting against. It's against everything that opposes your will. That stands up against you. That's what he's taken on. And in fact, I think he's a hero because that's what he's doing. And in fact, the suitors are killed because they're not doing it. And there seems to be a subtle lesson there that if you're not struggling, if you're not taking on a struggle of some kind and fighting, if you found some free lunch somewhere and you're just living and just taking it, you're probably a grifter. you're probably living off the back of someone else who is lifting some heavy weight. That seems to be the story. That seems to be the picture. That if you're really alive and driving after something in life, it's going to hurt. And
What's
takes
interesting,
a ton of
Paul, is
suffering.
to me, I don't know if this is true, and I'd be curious if anybody has thoughts on this.
Yeah.
It highlights the appeal of Penelope. I mean, we know Odysseus chose Penelope over her cousin Helen, who was the most beautiful woman in the universe. He didn't choose her. So there's something, even though she's older, it has to be about, being able to be a king of some place, but like, this isn't prime real estate. It's not great.
Yeah. No, it's just his home, for Odysseus. Yeah, he's not fighting for, anything that's in some way objectively value. It's all purely subjectively valuable. It's his wife, his home, his kingdom, because it is, his son, his slaves. And that's, and that's what's being taken. So it's subjective, it's internal, and that's why it's in the hands of the gods. And that's why that's what he's fighting, is that thing even the gods live within the context of fate. So I'm going to throw it out there. I think it's a subtle point, especially in a chapter that's so literal and bloody, and it is. But notice he just plows through, the first and best, and gets it done. And notice this is not chapter 24, and there are 24. So let's get to the end then. What do you like? What do you like to let sit? What's your kind of lingering question, or what do you like about this chapter?
Yeah, I love the final sentence. I'm fascinated by the final sentences of chapters in epics and also chapters in novels. And he fumigates the area, the hall, which is kind of great. Like, killing them's not enough. We have to get rid of, like, there's like body parts and stuff, but there's almost like a moral cleansing.
Absolutely.
But in the last sentence, Odysseus was seized by sweet desire to weep. He doesn't weep. He just has a desire to weep. In his heart, he knew them all.
Yeah.
And it says they kissed his face, took him by the hands, and welcome. So, like, that's the women, but I'm fascinated by the antecedent of that pronoun. Does he mean everybody in Ithaca? Does he mean the people he killed? Does he mean just the women being referenced now? So there's this hesitance to be fully emotionally vulnerable, and there's a sense that he knows everybody there. And there's a chance that neither of those is really great. Like, the inability to be vulnerable isn't great. And the thought that you ever know everybody. When is that ever true?
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm fascinated by that. It's what it feels like to me, and I could be wrong, and I'd be curious about people's thoughts. It feels like to me that killing all the bad guys doesn't mean he's done. He's not secure yet. He's not really fully home yet. Other things need to occur for him to be secure and home. And that's what the next chapters are.
And that's also true, plot-wise. It's a very nice closing scene. Fitzgerald has the antecedent is, and all the servants came now. I don't know who that is exactly. All the servants came now to embrace Odysseus, taking up his hands to kiss his head and shoulders while he stood there, nodding to everyone, overcome by longing and by tears. It's a great scene. And I think, I believe it. This is just great writing. I think if you're going to believe that scene, you might do it because of all the things we heard Eumaeus, the swineherd, say, and the way he behaved about him. He believably admires and loves Odysseus. If he could do it, then maybe it's true that that his household, slaves and all, actually many of them did long for his coming, that he actually was a good person to work for, to live with.
Yeah.
We've seen at least two people who believably think that, Eumaeus and Eurycleia.
Yeah.
But it's a nice closing scene. I like that. My lingering kind of awe in this chapter is just the just the way the story's told. I have the details, the specific details that punctuate the chapter, many of which have come up across the chapter tonight through our other parts. These details that highlight things that don't need to be there. The Athena mentor showing up in the doorway. I love that little scene. Not a ton is done with it really in the end, but it's kind of exciting somehow. I love right before Melanthios, the goat herd, is caught and strung up and brutally killed. It says Homer just takes some time to say he was piling through the storeroom and oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. And there was this old shield, Odysseus's dad had, and it was kind of rotten, but oh man, it was really cool. And you just see him like piling through. It says he couldn't hear the guy sneaking up behind him, and he's just going through the storehouse of old stuff. It's kind of funny right before he dies. And I think the diviner Leodes, this just cracked me up this time, especially, who begs for his life and says, Odysseus, I wasn't with these guys. I was just here and I was reading the signs and telling them the future. And then it's something the Fitzgerald translation says. He looked at him down below his eyebrows. And it's like one of those moments, like in a sitcom.
Yeah.
Where he says, okay, wait, you were telling them the future and you stuck around. So you didn't see me coming back and doing the killing. I'm going to put you down as a fraud. So it's like, oh yeah, that story kind of doesn't hold up. And then, of course, the maids, in the end, the excruciating details in that line, their feet danced a little, but not for long. I mean, it just takes you there, even places you don't want to be.
Yeah.
In such a way. But the writing of the chapter, the way it's laid out is kind of awesome, and it's worth paying attention to, especially if you have ambitions to write fiction and you wonder, as you try to write, I've done it, and you don't know how much time to spend in various places. So you need some muse to tell you how much detail or when to just move along. Notice how Homer does it. My gosh, he moves along sometimes. He takes forever. Other times at weird moments, there are some strangely specific details. And at other times it's not a weird moment. It's so appropriate and moving. So just the writing, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think, Tim O'Brien is always in my head as I read Homer because he's in my view, the greatest writer of war fiction of recent days. And his book, The Things They Carried, if I ever were to teach Homer and maybe had a little more time and taught it to slightly older kids, that would be an extraordinary companion. Homer has these incredibly moral characters, these incredibly heroic characters. And I think of Elpenor, who gets drunk and falls off the roof and dies. And it's like an example of like unheroic dying in war, which happens just like heroic dying happens. I think Homer has all of it. I think like somebody said, it's not a pro-war story or an anti-war story. It's a war story. It's heroic moments and there's cowardly moments and there's completely arbitrary, needless violence and then necessary. Like, it's all of it. It isn't some of war, it's war.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great way to put it. Odysseus, he alternately detests the war, does everything he can to keep from going. You'd think he would love to since he's so good at it, but despises it, doesn't want to go. And then when he's there, he's a rock star. Yeah, it's got the whole thing. And it's believable. It's plausible.
Yeah. All of it's there. Not some of it, not just the good stuff, not just the bad, all of it. All of it.
Yeah.
All of it and all of its messy complexity. All of it lives here.
And that ending of the story, it's kind of amazing. It struck me again. Picture Penelope waking up and coming down. They're just all gone. Everything's just gone, like as if by magic. And there's no blood and everything smells good. And the floor has been scraped down. There's no guts or body parts, but everything she's been living with for 20 years is just poof, gone.
Yeah.
Be a little magical scene. But that's what comes up next, 23 and 24. So there's some satisfaction in this, but there's high drama, enormous drama, in the next chapter. And I would say it's the only battle, I've said this before, it's the only battle in the whole book that Odysseus loses.
Yeah.
That comes up in the next book. He gets his butt kicked. I'm in book 23. So stay tuned. Come back.
Yeah, that's a really good
book
point.
23. And it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
All right, Jay, thanks for those insights and thanks for that poem to cue up the chapter. It was great talking through this with you and hearing how you've done this with students. And I hope it's helpful. If you find it helpful, like, subscribe, engage, send us some insights on how you've handled this chapter. All right. Good enough.
See you, Paul. Right. Good to see you.
Yeah. You too.
Bye-bye.